Rented e-scooters. If you live in Melbourne, it is hard to go a day without seeing one. But this week, the City of Melbourne Council has voted to ban hired e-scooters due to what it says is an unacceptable safety risk. It has caused a fierce debate, with the state government now pleading with the council to change their decision. So, where are we at with the exponential rise of rental scooters? And how has this debate been settled elsewhere in the world?
So, Billi, there have been lots of headlines over the last 48 hours about rented e-scooters in Melbourne. And I want to talk about what's happened there, but then I also want to take a bit of a broader look as to what the state of play is when it comes to e-scooters around the world. Before we get there, though, tell me what happened in Melbourne this week.
So on Tuesday night, the City of Melbourne Council, so the local council for that area in the CBD, they voted to ban rental e-scooters. So normal e-scooters that you own are completely fine. It's just the rented ones. You probably recognise the bright green scooters.
The lime ones.
Yes. Yeah. The ones that are literally everywhere in the Melbourne CBD.
Dropped exactly where I park and therefore need to just climb over them to reach wherever I'm going.
Yes. So what it would mean is that the council would end its contracts with e-scooter companies, which are mostly Lime and Neuron, nearly 6 months before they were due to expire. So right now we are in the middle of a trial, and I'll get into that. But basically they are ending that, and you basically won't see them anymore because of this decision. And the companies have 30 days to remove their scooters from Melbourne's CBD. There are other councils where they still will be fine, but in Melbourne CBD...
Which is a really large council area,
yes.
It needs to be said. Okay, so, I mean, I spend a lot of time in Melbourne, and so when I saw this headline, when I saw that the Lord Mayor had announced that this was going to happen, I just thought of all of my Melburnian friends who I know, you just can't go 50 metres without seeing an e-scooter or a Lime or whatever it is. They are everywhere in Melbourne, right?
Yeah. In the intro, I used the word exponential rise because it really has been like that. In the past 2 years, I've been there twice, and both times, these scooters have kind of been a key part of my trip because they're so much fun. I don't know if I've ever shared this story with you, but one time I was in Melbourne for work and I was using one of the scooters to get to the office where I needed to go. And I was on a footpath just briefly, and I got completely shouted at. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life, and it was the first time I realized that maybe these weren't the most popular with locals.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was clear that there was a lot of frustration, and it was clear that I hadn't been the first person that person had completely obliterated.
Yeah, hilarious. I mean, it's very clear that there are two sides to this argument. What is the history? Like, how did Melbourne become so littered with these e-scooters? Because Sydney doesn't feel like it has the same thing.
Yeah, no, Sydney has the bikes, but we don't have the scooters.
Yeah.
So rented e-scooters were first introduced to Melbourne in February of 2022, so we're about 2.5 years in. Now, when they were first introduced, they were just a trial, like I mentioned before, and that trial has just been extended several times since. Now, throughout the trial, there have been concerns raised about dangerous behaviours by riders, e.g. me. And there have been many fines that have been handed out to riders for their failure to comply with rules like wearing helmets, running red lights, etc. I have to say, in my defence, when you get on those scooters, apart from needing to wear a helmet, there wasn't anything that told me you absolutely cannot go on footpaths, you can't go in this place. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I think
it's kind of a bit of a free-for-all.
Yeah. So I think enforcing the rules has been a real concern for many.
Yeah.
And in May, there was a blitz from the Victorian Police of trying to hand out several fines to show that they are trying to enforce these rules. There have also been serious concerns about people getting injured. A Royal Melbourne Hospital study reported that there were over 100 e-scooter related head injuries in the trial's first year.
Wow.
Yeah, and those injuries cost the economy just under $2 million, which is not insignificant at all. Although I have just gone straight to the negatives, so I think we should also mention some of the positives.
Okay, so what are the positives then? Because there are many.
Yeah, one of the obvious ones, like I said, it's really fun when I went on it. It was a lot of joy. There was a lot of, wind in my hair enjoying my ride to work. And that is a positive that a lot of Melburnians have embraced it.
Yeah.
Melbourne actually has one of the highest rates of e-scooter uptake in the world. They have about 6,000 trips occurring a day on these rented e-scooters. Another positive is that it is good for the environment. So according to the state government, as of August last year, the trial had resulted in the city's carbon emissions being reduced by more than 400 tonnes. Again, not insignificant. And part of the reason for that is because it has encouraged more people to use public transport, and that's because people are using it as a way to connect their commute. So, for example, from a train to a tram, they're using these scooters in between that. And we know that that is good for the environment as well, which goes back to the 400 tonnes of carbon emissions being reduced. And that has also helped alleviate traffic with less cars on the road, which makes sense.
Yeah.
And another positive is that it has actually contributed more than $170 million to the local economy since 2022, and that's according to the state government.
Okay, so I feel myself flip-flopping on this issue as you speak. When you were talking about the negatives, I was like, yeah, they suck. And then when you talked about the positive, I was like, I love them. So let's go to the professionals and the experts. Why did the council make this decision? What was their reasoning?
So essentially, the Melbourne Lord Mayor, Nicholas Reece, who brought this motion to the council, said that he has basically just run out of patience with the scooters and said that they pose an unacceptable risk to people's safety. Here's a little bit of what he said during the council meeting on Tuesday night.
It's shameful. There are literally more people disobeying the law on e-scooters than there are actually following the rules. And the truth is, in a busy, densely populated city like Melbourne, a place where on a working day you can have close to 1 million people in the central city, to have people on scooters careening along footpaths without wearing helmets, double dinking, is an unacceptable safety risk in our city.
All right, so Lord Mayor Nicholas Reece, absolutely not mincing his words there. What have some of the responses to the announcement been?
I'll go straight to the Victorian Premier, Jacinta Allen, who isn't the happiest, and I think she's a pretty important person in this, being one of the most senior leaders in the state. So this is kind of an awkward one because this trial of e-scooters that I've been mentioning, that was a state government initiative, but in order for hired e-scooters to operate in an area, the companies need the explicit approval of the relevant local council.
Right. So there's those overlapping responsibilities of state and local government. So both need to kind of be on the same page for this to work.
Yes. And so the state government isn't, as you'd expect, pleased that the Melbourne CBD's local council isn't now cooperating with the state government's initiative. So the Premier, Jacinta Allen, said yesterday that she hopes that the local council is going to change their mind. Here is a little bit of what she said in her press conference yesterday.
Really hope that the City of Melbourne can have a change of heart on this decision. It was only 2 or 3 weeks ago that the Lord Mayor was pretty keen to be out talking about the benefits of e-scooters in the City of Melbourne. There are trials going on in other parts of the city and state.
Now, you'll hear there that she mentioned something that happened 3 weeks ago. There she's referring to when the Victorian government announced in July that e-scooters would be permanently legalised in Melbourne from this October with additional safety and compliance measures.
Right, bit of mixed messaging there. Okay.
Yeah, so literally 3 weeks ago, the Victorian government held a press conference and said e-scooters are here to stay in Melbourne. What's also interesting about that is that the Lord Mayor, Nicholas Reece, was at that press conference standing next to the minister who was announcing it. And so I think that also goes to why the Victorian government is a bit confused now, because what they're saying is just 3 weeks ago you were helping us say that these scooters were here to stay, and now you're saying that we're actually going to take them away.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add another level of complexity to the political arena that this is playing out in, there's actually a local election happening soon. So Lord Mayor Nicholas Reece, he has assumed that position because Sally Capp, who was the previous Lord Mayor, stepped down, and now he's contesting that. So they're in an election season as well. So there's so much to this. It's really quite fascinating.
Can always trust you to have niche election knowledge of local councils in Australia.
It's my favourite thing to do. Okay, so let's move now to Lime, because I imagine that they haven't taken to this announcement too well.
Yeah, so Lime is one of the biggest stakeholders in this debate. If you don't recognise the name I said before, you might recognise their really bright green colouring.
Or the noise. I was recently walking with my partner and someone was activating a Lime bike, and it does like do-do-do noise. And I was like, that is the noise of a generation. I could hear that in my sleep and not be confused. But anyway, Lime, very widespread.
Yes, and not very happy with this announcement, as you would expect. So they responded to this in a statement saying that they appreciate that councillors are hearing from what they say is a very vocal minority.
Interesting.
And they also said that removing the service in Melbourne could actually lead to more dangerous outcomes. So in a statement, they said, if hire schemes aren't around, riders will turn to unregulated, privately owned scooters that can be modified to travel at the same speeds as cars and without the ability to implement geofencing, slow zones and helmets.
So that's just the typical black market argument that if you ban something, people still do it, but it just becomes more dangerous. I mean, obviously we'd have to wait and see if that rings true, but it's an interesting argument there from a company that has a lot to lose right now. I want to turn really quickly before we end to the rest of the world, because Melbourne is by no means unique. We said that there's been a lot of uptake, but these e-scooters are all around the world. Can you tell me what has happened elsewhere?
So another city where these rented scooters have been really popular is Paris, and they have gone through the exact...
I had the time of my life on an e-scooter there. I just want to say there is nothing better in this world than being in summer in Paris on an e-scooter.
Well, that is not a luxury you can have anymore.
I know.
And I'll explain why.
Sad.
So they have gone through the exact debate that Melbourne is having right now. And the way they settled this debate is actually by putting it to a public poll last year. And that poll resulted in 90% of people who responded. So not everyone responded, and it was
no one
opt-in.
asked me.
You're not quite a citizen or a resident. But that poll resulted in 90% of respondents voting to remove scooters. So again, I think it comes back to it's not really the most popular thing for locals in these cities where it is really popular. And so ever since September last year, scooters have been banned in the city, and Zara, most importantly, hasn't been able to ride her scooter through the streets of Paris.
Again, niche experiences there coming to light on this podcast. Billi, thank you so much for explaining that. I mean, it seemed like a fairly straightforward story, but there are so many layers to it, and I think it'll be really interesting. This is a precedent that's being set in Melbourne, and seeing what happens elsewhere will be fascinating too.
Yeah, I think it's, it's an economic story, it's a safety story, it's a political story, it's a tourism story.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go to Melbourne now that they don't
there
have
you
the
go. Their
scooters.
only draw card is gone.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Daily Aus. If you would like to help us grow, if you can click follow on Spotify or Apple, it really helps us get up those charts and helps new people discover us. Thank you so much, and we'll be back again tomorrow.